Good afternoon. I'm David Leonard, president of the Boston Public Library and occasional moderator and host for our Repairing America series, of which today's program is a part. I'd like to welcome all of you, whether you're joining us in person or online, or if you are choosing to watch the recording after the program. Our Repairing America series focuses on lifting up issues and voices that have often been ignored in our past. Today, we're also celebrating and marking Hispanic Heritage Month. Funding for this series is provided by a range of private funding and the City of Boston's Joy Agenda for programs that help us deal with recovering in this time of COVID. For additional details about funding for these and other programs, or to become a supporter, please go to bplfund.org. First, some logistics about today's program. This is an experiment where we are doing a hybrid model where we have some guests here in person and we have many more guests joining us online at the same time. We'll do our best to take questions from you here in person as well as questions from the online audience as well a little bit later on. And we have two bookstore partners for today's program. At the conclusion of the program, we will hopefully have a signing session with Posman Books, a new bookstore, an independent bookstore from Newbury Street nearby. And our online book partner is Trident Bookstore and Cafe, and the information will be posted in the chat for those watching online. The program will run today between about 75 and 90 minutes. And for those of you using Zoom, we would invite you to use the Q&A button in the chat for questions for today's guest. We will also post the recording of the program later on our website. And so to our very special guest today, Sonia Manzano is a first-generation mainland Puerto Rican raised in the South Bronx. In the early 1970s, a scholarship took her to Carnegie Mellon, where she participated in the creation of a Broadway show hit. Some of you may know it, Godspell. From there, she went on to affect the lives of millions of parents and children when she was offered the opportunity to create the role of Maria on Sesame Street. And I grew up in Dublin, and yes, we had Sesame Street on television there, and so I'm very familiar with Maria as part of my childhood too. Since then, however, Sonia Manzano has received 15 Emmys for staff writing on Sesame Street. She has received a Lifetime Achievement Award, Emmy in 2016. She's an accomplished author with book titles that include No Dogs Allowed, A Box Full of Kittens, Miracle on 133rd Street, The Revolution of Evelyn Serrano, Becoming Maria, Love and Chaos in the South Bronx, and A World Together. Her publisher, Scholastic, recently announced a new 4-book deal with Ms. Manzano. The first novel, Coming Up Cuban, will be published in spring of 2022. And her new animated series, Alma's Way, will premiere on PBS in a couple of weeks' time, October 4th, I think, 2021. And we will chat a little bit about that and her story later in the program. But before we greet her and welcome her to the stage, please watch this short video, about a minute long. I'm sure some of the images will be familiar to many of you. Thank you.
Smile the smiles Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. This is a very intimate little crowd, but I guess with the internet now, it's never an intimate little crowd because everybody could be watching and we're not aware of it. I hope that they are. Well, you just saw my whole 44 years on Sesame Street compressed into 3 minutes. It was hard for the editor at the workshop to do that, but she did the very best she could. Speaking at a library always makes me think that I finally graduated from teaching the ABCs on Sesame Street to reading whole books. It took me a long time, 44 years. I certainly have been a long time on that show. And Maria, my character, has paralleled my real life every step of the way. When I think I was able to be on that show so long was because when I became a feminist, so did Maria. When I fell in love and got married, so did Maria. When I had a baby, so did Maria. I think her pregnancy was a little bit easier than mine. I'd leave her pregnancy in the makeup room at the end of the day. I'd have to take my home with me. Somehow being on Sesame Street and having my life portrayed as it happened made me think we were on the first reality show. Before it was an idea and before the whining on those shows began. I'll never forget the first time that I saw Sesame Street. I was attached to it even before I was cast. I walked into the student union of Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, and there on the screen was a very young, very bald James Earl Jones reciting the alphabet in this very deliberate manner, A, B, C, as the letters flashed over his head. It was the weirdest thing I had ever seen. And at first I thought that this must be a show that taught lip reading. But what really, really got me was when they cut to the street and I saw Susan and Gordon, this charming, urban, African-American couple, speaking to me from a place that looked very much like the place that I had grown up in. It had a fire escape, and it had a fire hydrant, and it had construction doors. And I thought to myself, what is my neighborhood doing on television? It was remarkable because at that time, and it's hard for me to get this across to audiences today, you never saw a person of color on television. And this is just in 1969. And if you did, they weren't the positive images that Susan and Gordon provided. I remember being in my apartment as a kid, and if a Black person appeared on television, everybody would run around the apartment, woo-hoo, 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 and you'd call the neighbors, look, this is incredible, a Black person on television. So it had really special meaning for me to see a person of color on television, and more importantly, to share it with you because it's Hispanic Heritage Month. At that time, Latinos, we weren't called Latinx then, and we still may not be called Latinx. It's that debate isn't over. But whatever you want to call us, we're invisible. We weren't on television, we weren't in books, we weren't in the media in any way. And I used to watch a lot of television in 1955, 56 when I was 5 and 6 years old. And in my viewing, and I would watch for hours because there was nothing else to do. I would watch Father Knows Best, and I would watch Leave It to Beaver, and I would watch Gunsmoke, and I would watch those shows that you could see in TV land. And not seeing anybody who looked like me or reflected anything about me made me feel invisible. Well, obviously, on some level, you're thinking, or I was thinking, how can I possibly contribute to a society that didn't see me? And that experience made me really understand Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. That's exactly what he's talking about in that opening sequence where he has a fight with someone just so that you could see him. And still, no one saw me. And if we weren't on television, we certainly weren't in books either. I remember learning to read from Dick and Jane. Does anybody remember the Dick and Jane book? Somebody does. It was two little blonde kids and their dog Spot. They lived in the suburbs. See Spot run, see Spot run. Jane sees Spot, Spot sees Jane, etc. And their father went to work in a suit when my father went to work in overalls. Their mother stayed home when my mother went to work in a factory. So their life was quite different than mine. I recently retired from Sesame Street, maybe like 2015, I think. I casually mentioned that I had retired from Sesame Street at a American Librarians Association conference some time ago in San Francisco. And the librarians and teachers tweeted that I had left the show, and it became national news by the time I hit the East Coast. It was really remarkable that so many people were paying attention. I got asked why I retired so many times. I would just tell them that 44 years was long enough for me to wait for Oscar the Grouch to propose. A woman's got to do what a woman's got to do. But seriously, since then, I have found myself reflecting on the early years of Sesame Street, what the mood of the country was at that time, how people were thinking of children's education. And to give you a sense of how things were in America, I'll read a little bit of the proposal that the creators of Sesame Street sent to the Rockefeller Foundation to get the funding for the show. I quote, "It is becoming obvious that no one knows what the world is going to be like when the time comes for the younger to live in it. So perhaps the kindest thing we can do is to try not to burden them with the quaint details of today's beliefs and customs, but just attempt to get across a few principles of how things work and how things interact and what is basic in human life, and to acquaint them with as thorough a cross-section as possible of persons, places, and things as they now stand. After this, we can only give them a pat on the shoulder and wish them well." Unquote. America was in the midst of beautiful social unrest. It was a youth-driven society. They were taking over college campuses. You were told not to trust anybody over 35 years old. There was an anti-establishment fervor as people protested a war in Vietnam, yet we were being influenced by the civil rights movement, by Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. So Sesame Street came out of that fervor, that righteousness. We originally targeted underserved African-American children in the inner cities. That was the first target. It was zero. It was a laser focus on African-American children. And the idea was that if they were armed with the same cognitive skills, letters and numbers that their middle-class peers had, they would start school on an even level with them. And thereby, we would close the education gap. A documentary was made recently celebrating Sesame Street's 50th year, and really you should watch it if you can. It's called Street Gang. And you'll see the creativity and the fervor and the perfect storm of Jim Henson and Joan Cooney and the civil rights. I mean, it was maniacal. We were on it 24/7. It was the most exciting time in my life. But what struck me in the documentary is there's an early interview with Joan Gans Cooney, who's a founder of Sesame Workshop. And she's on a talk show and she says, you know, the people who run the country can read. Therefore, these children should read if they're going to have some control over their lives. It's such a simple statement that it's beautiful and profound. Well, lucky for me, Everybody had a political platform, by the way. Everybody was in on trying to change something. And lucky for me, some Chicano activists on the West Coast decided that if public television had representatives for the African-American community, they should also have representatives for the Latin community. And then I got cast as, well, I am Puerto Rican, but I was Puerto Rican on the show, and they cast Chicano Emilio Delgado, who was cast as Luis. And to illustrate how everybody had a political platform in those days, when I first met Luis, I thought he was an activist, not an actor, because he had a bag as a supporter of Cesar Chavez, he carried around a bag of boycott grapes button, and he would pin it on everybody he saw. So I just assumed he was an activist, not an actor. He's a good friend of mine, and we got married on Sesame Street, and there was a big wedding. That was part of the reality show, part of my life there. And many people really believed that we were really married, so much so that one time he and I were together and we were recognized, and this woman came up to us. She was so happy, and she gushed and she cried, and she said how beautiful it was that her children should see real love happen on television, and thanking us for sharing our most intimate love affair with her. Well, what could we do? We told her that we weren't really married, and she sucked in her breath and said, well, as long as you really love each other. So in addition to the cognitive skills that Sesame Street was hell-bent on enabling children to absorb, there were social messages. I'll never forget going into the studio and seeing the wonderful singer, actor, activist leader, Lena Horne, singing It's Not Easy Being Green with Kermit the Frog. I mean, I wasn't a writer at that time, so I didn't really know what was going on behind the scenes, but as an observer, I was dumbstruck, and I thought, are they singing about what I think they're singing about? Are they singing about race? Well, of course they were singing about race, but they were also singing about what a drag it was to be a green puppet sometimes. They were also singing about Kermit's problems. And it was so nuanced that you would read into that song whatever you were going through in your own life. And that's the magic of Sesame Street, that it was nuanced. And I'm going to use that word nuanced a lot because I just read Trevor Noah's book, and he said, Americans can't stand nuance. We want things to be good or bad, right or wrong. Wear the mask, don't wear the mask. This is a good vaccination, this is not a good vaccination, and we want it all at the same time. My departure from Sesame Street stirred up many feelings. The most persistent one was asking myself or singing to myself, can you tell me how I got to Sesame Street in the first place? Was it good luck, good timing, being in the right place at the right time? I don't know, but if you had suggested to me that when I was a kid growing up in the South Bronx, that I was gonna grow up and be on a television show, I would have suggested you commit yourself to the nearest insane asylum. That's how far-fetched that notion was. My thoughts prompted me to write a memoir, Becoming Maria, Love and Chaos in the South Bronx. Maybe there, oh, there it is, right? There it is right behind me. And it's an examination of my journey to Sesame Street all through my adolescence, ending with my audition to the show and nailing the part of Maria. I wanted to write, people write memoirs because they want to like follow their journey. I mean, then you could look at it and follow your journey, see where you came from, and kind of get a sense of where you're going. My outcome is unbelievable because not only did I have the worst kind of inferior elementary school education, I mean, all you had to do was show up and not be a felon and they'd pass you. But because my family had a tumultuous lifestyle, a deadly combination. That little girl is not me, but certainly could have. I mean, that's how we went to school, carrying those bultos, el bulto, those big briefcases. Let's move on to the next picture. That's of my family. That's me, an adorable 4-year-old up there. My parents at an amusement park with my 2 brothers. It was Sunday and we had to stay dressed up all day because we had come from church, even if you went to an amusement park. That's my mother in Puerto Rico. My father, me as a flower girl, I guess, me in Crotona Park in the Bronx, I really thought I was so hot in that skirt. I remember it quite, I just thought this was it. My brother up there, my little brother, and my scowling sister, Audia, who, by the way, still looks like that and still scowls. She's always absolutely exasperated. I was really always interested in that picture of my mother because I had never been to Puerto Rico, and she looks so beautifully dressed up in that homemade dress with her beautiful shoes, but she's standing in a place in Atorrey that was a sewage, and there were houses on top of it, and children would drown in that sewage. And I was obviously fascinated by this, and that she would look so beautiful in front of that mean environment. Let's move on to the next one. That's me. I guess that was a high school graduation. That's me as a flower girl. I'm sure I contributed. I'm sure I made a hole in the ozone layer with all the amount of hairspray I'm wearing to keep those curls up. Absolutely. And me in junior high school. And that's me at the end there with a French twist, because everybody loved Kim Novak and in Vertigo. And that was the look you wanted to have, was a French twist. Thank you. Next picture. Oh, these are the 2 photos, I guess, that I jumped the gun and explained them to you a little earlier, but you can see how kind of enigmatic. I used to wonder about the kids in the doorway. Like, why were they there? Why weren't they in school? And this is my sister with her little Mary Janes. I guess that was the last time she smiled. But there you are. I also did a book for National Geographic that had photographs in it. And it was the first time that I had to sort of write about photographs. And they draw you in. Photographs have a story of their own. And I had to put captions on them. Next one, please. Is that it? Oh, I guess that's it. Anyway, so the story is my parents migrated from Puerto Rico after World War II, like many others, found their way to the mainland to escape the poverty that I just saw you, and find a decent way to live. My father worked on roofs, as I didn't mention, but he did. My mother was a seamstress, and they began their struggle. They struggled with the system, with speaking English. They struggled so much that the term for the struggle, la lucha, peppered their everyday conversation. When they answered the phone, they'd say, "Here we are in la lucha." When they'd see their friends, it was hilarious. When they see their friends in the street, "Hey, how are you doing?" "Oh, okay, well, here we are in la lucha." But mostly, of course, they struggled with each other. My mother struggled with my father's violent, drunken tirades. And now as an adult, I know my father struggled with some inner hidden demons that I didn't understand at the time. So they had the cyclical story of domestic violence, a reconciliation, run away, come back, more domestic violence, run away, blah, blah. So it was a confusing childhood, but I found sanctuary on television. I looked at television for order and comfort. I longed for the lifestyles that I saw on Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best, even though I didn't see myself in it, as I mentioned before. It was like looking at it to like the world. And I wondered where these people were and where I was going to be when I grew up, if I was ever going to be a part of it. I also found comfort in schools. There was a tracking system in place in those days. If you didn't speak English or had emotional problems, you were put in the slow learners class. If you were at all intelligent, you were put in the smart kid class, and you were in the smart kid class for your whole educational career. Well, I was a genius. Always volunteered, always had the right answers, always got chosen to clean the blackboard. And the erasers, those are the days you used to smash them together and get it in your lungs. I can't imagine that, why I'm still standing. I had the best penmanship, and when I was allowed to read, I read Dick and Jane books quite carefully. I've lost my place. So when I got into high school, though, I was in for a rude awakening, because all of a sudden I went from being an A student in the Bronx, where very little was expected of me, to competing with middle-class kids who went to the High School of Performing Arts, or the Fame School. Many of you might have seen it on television, with a television show and a movie. There was no way that I was going to compete with these kids who had better elementary school educations than I did. But still, I wanted to get a higher education. So I auditioned for this school, Carnegie Mellon University, and that is how I got in on acting. So I can't say that I really had to follow, I had a gotta dance sensibility that I always wanted to dance or perform, but I did want a higher education. People are often praised for, like, she overcame a tough childhood and became this. And I don't think I did that. I think I embraced my childhood. I think the reason Maria is successful is because I never forgot myself watching Father Knows Best and wondering where I was and why I wasn't in there, or why people like me weren't in there. And then I grew up to be that. One of the titles for this book that I got talked out of was Healing Myself Through Time and Television, which is a terrible title, but that's how I felt I was living my life. That's why I was going to be on television. It's remarkable to me that I became a writer. I tell this crummy joke of my father needing a pencil and rummaging through my mother's purse and coming up with an eyebrow pencil to write a phone number on the kitchen wall. So I would have become a writer earlier if I only had a pencil. But I did always love reading, even though it wasn't valued in my house. If you were curled up reading, people would say, why don't you go change somebody's diaper or do something useful? Reading was not useful. But getting back to my Dick and Jane stories, the teacher would make me wait until the whole class caught up before I could turn the page. So I would sit there being bored. One time I was on the 3rd Avenue elevator train with my sister, the Grouch, Audia, and I asked her what it said above in the ads above her head. And she said, oh, why don't you try reading it, dummy? Well, I thought reading was something you did in school with Dick and Jane books. I didn't know that reading was a bigger experience to be used in the bigger world. Well, I looked at the letters, and all of a sudden they all made sense, and I could sound them out, and one sound led to another, and I'm reading. It was remarkable. I'll never forget it. I trembled with joy. I read all about how smoking Chesterfield cigarettes was really good for you. And I read all about the hopes and dreams of Miss Subway 1957. Well, there became my reading journey. I read cereal boxes, soda boxes, toothpaste. It was reading phonetics. I think phonetics is the way to teach reading. When they changed that, I think that was a big mistake was made. I would go back, because it's like a mystery. Car. I mean, it's like fun. It's like figuring something out. Years later, at some point, before I read books, my teacher said that my mother should read to me. I said to Mom, the teacher says you should read to me. This is my overwhelmed mother. She says, Don't I got enough to do? Tell your teacher we don't have any books. Told him. He said, just tell her to tell you stories of her life. Came back. Well, there began a wonderful time in my life where she would tell me stories of her life in Puerto Rico. She would tell me what it was to be poor. She would tell me about hurricanes. And all of a sudden, my mother became a different person in my eyes. And, you know, she fueled my hunger for more stories. And she became so interesting to me. Stories and books bring people together. I can tell you this because another example of this is that in junior high school, we couldn't take books home from the library. So I remember finding a book named 15, entitled 15, and I would read as much as I could on library day, remember the page, and then come back the next week and read the rest. Well, my parents had a fight. We moved into another neighborhood, so I never finished the book. But years later, as I've grown up, I find myself in a rural library in Pennsylvania, and there's 15 prominently displayed. Well, I grabbed it and finished it. Well, of course, it was a great book because it was written by Beverly Cleary. And that's why it stayed in my mind. Now, you might think, well, why does she care about this book? You know, it was about a middle-class white girl who lived in the suburbs. It appealed to me because there's a moment in the book where she disobeys her parents, and she wants to make up for it by rushing home, cleaning the house, starting dinner, setting the table, and practicing her cello so that when her mother walks in the door, she's like the perfect vision of appropriateness. What teen kid hasn't done that? I did the same thing, trying to distract my mother from something that I hadn't done. So that character, what happened in her life, touched me. I can't tell you how many times I've come across stories just like that. I recently heard the author Kate DiCamillo, who's a very well-known children's book author, say that she was being bullied in elementary school, and the class was reading The Watsons Go to Birmingham, which is a very popular book. And she says that she remembers a moment where she and the bully looked to each other, and in that moment, they looked to each other at a moment wherein they shared the book. They both looked, and in that moment, they were equal. And they were simpatico, and he wasn't bullying her anymore. They met together on a human level. She says it didn't quite stop him from bullying her, but they were on common ground for one moment. If you can be on common ground for one moment, you could certainly be on common ground for two. I started writing for Sesame Street when I had strong opinions on the Latino content. The producer said, why don't you try writing some myself? So I started. I knew the characters, and I waited till the last day of taping so I could give them to her in case they were awful. I wouldn't have to face her for like a couple of months. But they weren't. Went on to write, and then I wanted to write books, and then Frank McCourt wrote Angela's Ashes, and my world flipped. That book made such an impression on me. I would get up early so I could be with this book all alone and laugh so hard sometimes coffee would shoot out of my mouth. I could not believe that this miserable Irish upbringing could be told with such compassion and love. And then I thought, I have all of those things in my life. I had a miserable childhood. I have a sense of humor. I can do this too. So I wrote my first picture book based on inspiration from Frank McCourt, No Dogs Allowed. And I went on to write other books, A Box Full of Kittens. They're little memoirettes of things that happened to me in the South Bronx, but I gave them happy ending. I think I was always meant to be a writer if it had only been shown to me. If you don't see it, you can't be it. To me, writing when I was a kid was something Caucasians did, intellectuals did, not me. But we're hoping to change that. Books and stories are more important than ever in the life that kids lead now, because we're in such a data-driven society. Kids are assessed, analyzed, tested, even before they experience the joys of thinking or going into their minds. They are not expected to use their imaginations. Imagine, this is America where it's think outside the box. Now it's everybody fit in a box. This is the exact opposite of what I was raised to believe to be an American. Assume that children will interpret books differently if they are from different cultures. I brought my own answers to Charlotte's Web when I was a kid because this is a remarkable book at a time when teachers could do that for you. They could break the curriculum and read you a book. They can't do that now. They have to stick to a curriculum. This teacher shared Charlotte's Web. I couldn't stand Wilbur. I thought he was a loser because here's Charlotte's doing all of this work. She's having the little spiders. She's making the web. She's catching the fly. And here she's got to take care of him. Well, obviously it was because I was surrounded by overwhelmed women who did all the work. The men that I knew didn't cook or do any chores, only the women. So I put my life into the book. I felt that about A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. Of course, because it took place in New York, but also there's a moment in the book where the family lies about their address so she could go to a better elementary school in a better neighborhood. And I knew families who did that in the South Bronx too. So all of a sudden I got this. Okay, I'm getting the signal here that we should wrap this up and answer some questions. So thank you for coming and stick around. We'll talk some more. Thank you.
Shall we?
Absolutely, yes.
Sonia, thank you so much
sure.
for sharing your story and very entertaining presentation of some thoughts. You know, I was fascinated to read Becoming Maria, in part because I think most of us presumably only know you as Maria. Maybe we followed you a little bit later, but just thinking about, well, where does Sonia start and stop, and where does Maria start and stop? And I just love your thoughts now on that point, looking back.
Well, I think I was always Maria is me on purpose. Maria is Sonia on purpose. Only kind of a better me, a kinder me. It was hard in the beginning because I said just be yourself. And on Sesame Street, and it's easier to play a character. But when I got the hang of being myself, I knew exactly what that was. It's what I am here.
And how soon after the audition did it dawn? I have two parts to this question. One is that this was really about an educational purpose, not just a little show. And then the second question is going to be about that this was big. This had the impact of Sesame Street and the roles.
Let's see, I was on the air. They told me I got the job right away. And I think the most important things happen to you when you least expect it. I mean, I wasn't really thinking that, you know, my life was going to change, which it did. It was the third year that the show was on the air that I got. It had already been on the Johnny Carson show, who was a very popular late night show host. It had already been satirized on Saturday Night Live. I thought the show was going to last a couple more years. I knew it was groundbreaking and everybody loved it, but for a show to last more than 3 years was unheard of. I think Mary Tyler Moore lasted 15. 60 Minutes is still on the air. That lasted a long time, but Americans don't like old things. We live in a disposable society.
But 30, 40 years later, here we are.
Here we are.
But the educational component, that strikes me as just being so brilliant, and hearing words from some of the founders that you referenced that tell us what they were about.
Yes, they really had they thought, we can use television to teach this, because Joan Gans Cooney, the founder, noticed that kids were remembering Rolaids commercials and you know, if you want to sell a car, pop, pop, fizz, fizz, oh, what a relief it is. So whatever, Alka-Seltzer. So she thought, well, if they can memorize that, why can't they memorize the alphabet? It's such a simple, and then Jim Henson was really excited by the idea of using commercial advertising techniques to sell the alphabet. Sell it, use the alphabet, it's yours.
Sometimes we think about reading and television, and now the internet and videos on that platform, as being opposites, But I think both in your own life and in the educational vein, they're not opposites. They're just two ways of telling stories.
Right, there are two ways of telling stories. Sesame Street had to change as the landscape of television changed. It used to be a magazine format, you know, a lot of quick cuts because it was created when Flip Wilson was on the air, Carol Burnett, variety shows, Laugh-In, magazine format. Then it became those, the Norman Lear sitcoms that were narratives. So the writers are in meetings and they're telling us, we got to do narratives. Kids want, because kids know what everybody else is watching. They're not just watching like, you know, kids stuff. They know what you're watching. They know you're watching America Doesn't Have Talent or whatever it is.
I think we were talking earlier that for some young people, reading is not seen as really something fun or something for them. But there are other forms than simply a chapter book or a storybook. You were mentioning something about poetry and graphic novels as another access point, if you will.
Yes, of course. For a while, Latin people would read these novelas. Do you remember novelas? You'd see people on the train watching, you know, reading these graphic novels. It was really the beginning of graphic novels. And you're referring to, I heard Jason Reynolds,
Yeah,
the poet. He said on PBS, My Spectacular Moment, he said, forcing a kid to read a book with a lot of words is like forcing a kid who's afraid of dogs to go into a kennel. How much more beautiful to just give him the peacefulness of looking at a mostly white page with a few poetic words. That will make him hungry to see more. And well, he's brilliant, Jason Reynolds.
You probably get asked this question a lot. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Is there a favorite Sesame Street puppet?
I get asked that all the time. And it is Oscar the Grouch. I love Oscar the Grouch because he's nuanced.
Yeah.
He's either, you know, he's either 40 or 8 years old. You know, he can play those various things. And he also, Carol Spinney, who played Big Bird, also played Oscar the Grouch. But Carol's personality is more the birds. But he has this mean streak that comes out when he wears the puppet. And I always say that the puppeteers save a lot of money in therapy because they have those puppets to hide behind.
I can't imagine what it's like working with the puppets in that regard.
It's wild. I mean, they're reading their lines and they're sitting at my feet and trying to crack me up while I'm on camera.
Scripted or unscripted?
I know.
Maybe let's fast forward a little bit to what's coming up. Would you tell us a little bit about the new series, the new animated series?
Yes, I'm very excited. Alma's Way is going to debut on PBS Kids October 4th. It's an animated series that I created, and it's produced and was further developed by Fred Rogers Productions. And I was asked by PBS to create a Latin family show. And of course, because I'm Puerto Rican and raised in the South Bronx, and that's where I placed Alma, but what the show was about was left up to me. And I noticed that, like I said, I think we're a data-driven society and kids are turned off to thinking because they can't memorize quick enough to pass the test. We expect kids to learn at the same moment that their peers do, not 6 months later or 6 months before. And so these kids were like, I hate school. And I thought, wait, let me tell you about something. It's called your mind. You could do anything there. It's your domain. You could think of things. You could put 2 and 2 together. So in every episode, our little character, Alma, who's very much like me, has a problem. She says, I got to think about this. And a globe appears next to her head. And then we see the process of her thinking. She says, if this is this, you know, whatever she saw in her life, or if this is true about this, then it must be true about this, and so on and so forth. And I'm hoping that kids will understand that they have the mind, that everybody has a mind, whether you're documented, undocumented, rich, poor, everyone has one, and we can use them.
What age range is the target
It's
audience?
preschoolers. It's like, you know, 4 or 5 years old. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Good. We'll keep an eye out for that. I'm going to take a few questions. So if there's a question in the audience, just raise your hand and we'll bring a microphone to you. We are broadcasting live on Zoom, so we want everybody else to hear those questions as well. And we also, if you are watching us live on Zoom, use the Q&A button there to submit a question, and Jana will present those to us here live in the library at Copley Square. Just while we'll go to you in a second, just while people are thinking of their questions, you referenced, I think during your opening comments, realizing that you had seen a Black couple for the first time on television. You know, I certainly am personally familiar with the whole Star Trek and Lieutenant Uhura being the first Black woman on that season, and then you yourself become the first recognizable, or one of the first recognizable Hispanic individuals on television. Was that deliberate choice? Did you know it was happening as it was happening? Tell us a little bit more about that experience.
I certainly didn't think, oh, let me grow up to be what I needed to see on television. That kind of happened, and this whole idea of being the first makes me want to share this with you. Mrs. Robinson, Michelle Obama's mother, was asked, "You must be really proud of your kids." And she said, "Yes, I'm very proud of my kids. But there are other kids like them in the South Side too." So when I say, people say I'm the first, I have to think, yeah, but there were others like me. The implication of being the first was as long as you're capable, they'll let you win. That's not true. You could be capable and they won't let you win. But I was at the right place. I had support. Who knows? You know, I mean, it was a perfect storm. You know, like the Beatles, separately, they're okay. Together, I had the perfect storm. So I just want to share that about being, though I understand how wonderful I am, I wouldn't disagree with any of you.
None of that takes away from being the actual first. We'll take the question from the audience.
Hi, thank you. I grew up on Sesame Street, and so Maria was somebody that I looked forward to seeing every day. So fast forward a couple decades when I saw you on an episode of Law and Order, and my immediate thought was, oh, Maria became a judge. And I just wondered, that it was tough for a couple of minutes there for me to realize that's not Maria as the judge. She's playing a character. Has it been hard for you to take on other roles as an actress after having been Maria for so long?
Not really. It's not like a lot of roles are being offered to me, except for that one, Gloria Peppertone. Somebody tweeted, Judge Peppertone, give Oscar the electric chair. I know, I didn't say it. I'm just telling you what somebody tweeted, but it was terrible. But I think I am seeing that in that persona. I love to perform. But I really like being myself. You know how Meryl Streep says she's a vessel to play other characters? No, I'm probably not that. I'm like, I like being myself. I like doing this, you know, what I'm doing.
Wait for the microphone, please. Thank you. Just so we can get everybody to hear online as well. Thank you.
Oh, it's not a question, it's a request. For me, and I'm also Puerto Rican, but from Brooklyn, my friends want a picture. So after, can I get a picture with you? Because for me, you're my Jennifer Lopez, and for my friends and my comadre. So that's my request.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, we'll see if you can, the staff can coordinate that.
Thank you.
Though I gave a talk once, and I used to sort of date Northern Calloway, who plays David on the show. And I gave a talk, and the woman said to me, "Why, you and David, you were the J-Lo and P. Diddy of my generation."
There's another question over here.
Thank you so much for coming to Boston today.
Sure thing.
I'm curious what you, as a actress and children's educator, like to read when you're not educating others but yourself.
Oh gosh, I read, what did I just read? I just read Cast, Isabel Wilkerson's book is a stunning book. The Vanishing Half is also a wonderful book. A book by Angie Cruz named La Dominicana, or Dominicana it's called, is also a wonderful book. I'm drawn to memoirs. And so those are the latest three that I'm looking at. And The Underground Railroad, and that I'm going to read because I love the series so much. Colson Whitehead. Colin Whitehead. I apologize, Mr. Whitehead, if you're watching.
We'll add references to all of those to the online version and recording so people can chase those down for themselves too. I'm going to return back to the Becoming Maria, and the audition at the end. I think the way you tell it is kind of fascinating to me. Would you mind just telling us a little bit about that?
I don't
if
know
you
what
want to
you're
read it, that would be even that would be interesting as well. There's a point where you get to the Children's Television Workshop on Broadway and 63rd Street. The interview is with John Stone, and he asks you to tell a scary story.
Right, right. Shall I read it?
Sure.
I can
It's this
see it.
section from there forward.
Oh, thank you. Then he asks me to tell a scary story, once again to him as if he were a little kid. Without thinking, I quickly and immediately go back to 3rd Avenue where I was most scared. The dream or experience I had with the periscope, with the big eye watching, stalking my every move and breathing down my neck jumps into my mind. Once upon a time in the old, should I go on?
Yeah.
Once upon a time in the olden days, there lived a little girl who lived alone in the woods full of goblins and fairies and monsters, I begin. She had to hunt for her food every day. And one day, out hunting, she felt something watching her. She turned around but couldn't see what it was, but she couldn't shake the feeling of long hair sweeping along her neck. It made her feel so creepy and nervous she couldn't catch a thing to eat. I mean, who could hunt in a situation like that? That went on for days until she got very hungry. John Stone looks amused, but would still like to hear me get on with it. Finally, she had had enough and she yelled, "Why don't you come out and look me in the eye?" And it did. It was a big, ugly eye that had been watching her all the time. It was huge and bloodshot and had long, sticky eyelashes that practically swept across the back of her neck. It scared her so much she ran and ran, but the eye got closer and closer. Finally, it got so close, the little girl had no choice but to face it. She had no weapons, so she decided to bite it. I can't believe I wrote this. Should I go on?
That's fine. I just think it tells us something about what he must have been looking for. Someone who could tell a story, connect with kids, and just be a person that individuals would trust. And it all comes
So
through.
I guess so. Yeah, I mean, and then I go on and relate the story. And that story happened from watching cartoons as a kid. We used to watch unsupervised, these really scary cartoons, and they were like a post-World War II cartoons, and there was always a periscope that would come up and chase the submarine, and there would be like not a Nazi sign on the submarine. This is cartoons for kids. Muñequitos, whatever. So the periscope came up and it had a big eye in it and chased the submarine. That's what I remember from the cartoon. And then I had a moment where I was alone in my room. I'm like 6, and I'm sure that the periscope has come up behind my bed and is watching me. And that was a scary story. And when John asked me to tell a scary story, that's the one that came into mind. I guess I'm still using my life experiences to get me through.
As you think about perhaps the educational opportunities that we all need, I'm just struck that we have, as we come through this COVID reality, this 18 months, this 2 years of trauma, and think about our youngest residents and our young people who have, for many, not been as successful academically or not been as successful. There's just their social and emotional learning environments. What are your thoughts about what we have to do next?
I don't think we're gonna know yet what the result of this. I think that we're gonna have a real high class and a low class society, because obviously the kids who don't have access to the internet or have limited access to the internet. I know a teacher who says her students don't put the camera on because they're embarrassed about where they live, or the parents are saying, oh, since you're going to be home, take care of your siblings. So they're babysitting while they're trying, or there's no internet service. So they're hanging around McDonald's with a phone to get internet service. So those children are really going to suffer. The little children will suffer because they don't have any human interaction. Somebody interviewed me recently and told me that their child had to watch, in kindergarten, had to be in front of the computer for 5 hours. How can you expect a kid to do that? Okay, now, so the people who have access to a nice computer in a nice room with a lot of, they're not going to do well either. I mean, they're going to do better, but I think the educational gap that we've been trying to close since I started Sesame Street 50 years ago might even get wider.
Are there positive signs in the gap since then to now?
Well, I mean, I think that there are positive signs in that Latins are more seen, because Alma's Way has all Latin staff practically. And when I started Sesame Street, it was hard to find Latin writers and actors and all of that, but that's not the case now. And I think that being forced to use the computer or to learn or Zoom, we have skills we didn't know we had.
For example?
Well, I mean, I'm a complete Luddite with this stuff, and I'm learning how to Zoom, and I do my own hair, my own makeup, my own scenery. I'm doing like a one-woman show here where I couldn't do that before. I made a recording studio out of my linen closet because a lot of people want you to record, and I did a voice on a show called Casa Grande, which is a Nickelodeon show. And they said, oh, we're going to send you a microphone. You'll do it from home. I said, no, this is not going to work. How's this going to work? A broadcast quality? So people, invent things when they have to.
Right.
I mean, but that's certainly not as important as getting an education.
Are there any final questions that people would like to ask, either in person or online? We have one up in the back.
I think for me, I do remember also growing up and seeing your face on Sesame Street and getting so excited as one of my favorite characters in the show. And hearing more about your story, I think you are such a beautiful example of resilience, especially given your childhood. And when you were talking about writing a memoir and kind of tracing back the steps to where you are today, what do you think were some of the key characters and components of building that resilience in you to get to where you are today? And similarly, what do you think are those components for children in those situations today, and how they can be resilient and to rise above their situations as you did?
I think I have a sense of humor. And that gets you through so much. And my mother had a sense of humor, and we would howl at things, even when things were going terribly. We would love Ralph Cramden and the Honeymooners. I think having a sense of humor is important. I think parents don't applaud that in their children, they think they're fooling around. They don't see that it could be the most important quality to have is a sense of humor. I was very close to my cousin Eddie Guagua Rivera, who was a salsa player with Larry Harlow. And we were buds, and we, helped each other. And I think that if anybody's interested in writing their own memoir, they shouldn't be intimidated by what their relatives might think because of what you might reveal. Because my sister says, that didn't happen. Or it happened, but I wasn't frightened. Or so everybody, a life is made up of what you remember and the memories. It's not the actual events that are important. So I would bear that in mind, and if anybody's out there interested in writing their life story.
Thank you, Jen. All set. I have a final question, which is
Yes.
kind of an open-ended one. And I did mention that, we're trying to bring a little more joy back into our lives overall, where we can. It's not always possible. So I'm just going to open it to you, Sonia. What gives you joy and what gives you hope?
I'll tell you what gives me joy and gives me hope is kids. You'll see these horrible footage of war-torn areas, and the newscaster's giving this very serious news, and behind him a kid's going. I mean, you want to say, don't you know you're in a war-torn area? Or they'll set up barricades, and the kid is using it for hide and seek. Or, I'm certainly not making light of the terrible plight that children are, but when you see them in these horrible areas playing around, it has to give you hope. When you look at a bunch of kids and you go, hey, you, the cute one, turn around, they'll all turn around. If you say, who can sing and dance, raise your hand. They all, they start out with that feeling. They start out with that joy for existing. We were having breakfast and that kid was like, in his own little world,
Throwing a toy around.
throwing stuff around, in the dining room. And I think that it's that joy we have to sort of nurture and keep going, because, eventually it'll say who can sing and dance, and they won't all. Life will already get to them. So that's my concept of joy, and I applaud your mayor for trying to get a little joyfulness in this area.
Thank you. We could all do with a little more of that for sure. Sonia, thank you for sharing your story and your joy and your humor and your hope with us. There will be hopefully a book signing outside for those who would like to engage with that. We'll be upstairs in about 5 minutes or so. Please keep an eye out for some upcoming programs. The next guest is Ellen Hildebrand on October 7th, a fiction writer with most of her novels actually being set on Cape Cod and the islands. And she has a backstory of being a breast cancer survivor herself, which shows up in her fictional characters as well. Larry Spotted Crow Mann on November 3rd is a local author and educator, and his work, Drumming and Dreaming, will be highlighted, which is in conjunction with our celebration of Indigenous Peoples Month. And then Nora McInerney on 12/4 is a podcaster and author whose work on grief and resiliency may have some offerings for us at this time too. For these and other programs and services, and indeed all our collections, please go to our website at www.bpl.org. Thank you all for joining us today, whether in person or online, or even after the recorded programming is posted. Please be well, please be safe. Once again, Sonia, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you.